A year ago, Trinidad and Tobago elected a new government on the promise of change, despite that party's previous track record of corruption. But this time their governance has been significantly worse, and the country's relationship with the United States has shifted dramatically. Over the past year, I've been watching as my country has taken steps toward becoming a client state in everything but name, as our diplomatic, military, and economic stances have shifted toward complete subservience to US interests. To explain my stance, I'm going to try to cover the major incidents of the past year, though I won't be able to cover everything. Because the current government, the United National Congress, or UNC, led by Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar, has seemingly adopted the strategy of flooding the zone. If you're unfamiliar with the term, flooding the zone refers to a political communication strategy where so many controversies, scandals, policy changes, and public disputes happen in rapid succession that it's almost impossible for regular people or even journalists to keep up. TikTok pages like Trini Rambles cover many of the day-to-day dramas, so if you want to scroll through that record of what's going on, you could check out that link. But my main focus will be on especially where this present administration of the UNC government has taken the country in a direction where we might be independent on paper, but are basically a colony in practice. I'm doing this to inform my local and international audience, but especially to let the Americans in my audience see how their country is exerting its influence in a corner of the world that many of you may not be able to find on a map. To implore you all to please do something. So here's what's been happening. First of all, the US is building a massive new 11-acre embassy near the capital, investing over $500 million in its construction. Now, this project was underway since before the UNC came into power, but in my eyes, it signals a clear intent on the US's end to stake a more significant presence in the country, especially with that massive embassy being built in such close proximity to the Chinese embassy. In a time when the Caribbean has become an arena of competition between the US and China, in a time when the US is attempting to assert its claim to the rest of the Americas as its backyard. You may not know this, but during World War II, the US had a military base in Trinidad due to its strategic location. And the US actually has quite the history of involvement across the Caribbean, whether directly through military force or indirectly through political, intelligence, and security partnerships. See, for example, the Dominican Republic in 1965, Grenada in 1983, Haiti on multiple occasions, and Panama in 1989. Not to mention their repeated attempts to violate Cuba's sovereignty. So in a time of rampant global tensions, clearly the US doesn't intend to spend that kind of big money on an embassy without a return on their investment. And the current UNC government has indicated a great willingness to accommodate the US's interests. You know, for decades, even as the US and Venezuela were going at it, the government of Trinidad and Tobago was trying to maintain a neutral stance. Even with the migration and maritime border related issues, there was a mutual understanding that Venezuela is our closest neighbor and we want to be on good terms with them. And the US is our most powerful neighbor, so we kind of have to be on good terms with them. But since taking office, the UNC government has moved Trinidad and Tobago much more firmly into the US's geopolitical positioning, getting far more confrontational with Caracas and going as far as to cooperate with the US, allowing them to dock in our seaports, refuel in our airports, and set up a radar system in Tobago, as they carried out their special operation involving the kidnapping of President Maduro and puppeting of Venezuela. After years of increasing the pressure on the people of Venezuela through sanctions and diplomatic isolation, Trinidad's cooperation helped facilitate the US's ambitions. And while the rest of the Caribbean community maintained a neutral stance, Trinidad broke from that stance and betrayed our neighboring country to its imperialist enemy. Unfortunately, the geopolitical alignment doesn't even end with this stance against Venezuela, as Trinidad voted with the US, Russia, and Israel against the reappointment of the UN Human Rights Chief who had condemned Israel's conduct in Gaza. But that's a whole nother can of worms in itself. Finally, our government has decided to sign memoranda of understanding with American companies for AI infrastructure and industrial development. This includes a proposed 300 megawatt AI data center and another 150 megawatt AI infrastructure project. And something which has gotten less scrutiny, an agreement to revive TNT's steel industry through Pinnacle Steel and Vanadium Corporation. The government has presented these projects as a path toward economic diversification and thousands of jobs. Never mind that most of those jobs will be temporary. But let's be serious about what this means. AI data centers consume enormous amounts of electricity when our national grid has yet to maintain a stable supply for sections of the population. AI data centers require vast quantities of water for cooling, while some communities are already struggling with unreliable water supply. And then you have to consider the impact on nearby communities and wildlife, as the noise pollution that AI data centers generate and the health risks that are associated with these centers are only now coming to light. Notably, the steel production facility was touted for its production of vanadium, which is a strategic metal used in aerospace, military aircraft, and energy storage. As if our cooperation with the US military wasn't bad enough, we're now buying into the military-industrial complex. We're signing up to be a cog in their supply chain, taking us into a direction where foreign military and AI companies get to treat our country as a sacrifice zone for the coming years. And when people raised some of these concerns, Prime Minister Kamala responded by calling the country a dump, basically saying that if some people litter, then we have no right to complain about anything. Madness. On the domestic side of things, the UNC has been brushing up on its Trump impression. So they won the April 2025 election after 10 years in opposition. They claimed to be able to solve all the issues in the country people were struggling with, from cost of living to crime. But even before they won, the signs were there. Aside from their tenure in the opposition, aside from their last time in governance, which should have been a clear indication of what kind of timing they were on, there was a very clear tone in their campaign communication, which was agitation and polarization in the style of Trump's rhetoric. Anyone who criticized them was an enemy, and the previous ruling party, the PNM, well, they were the devil. Now, historically, voting in Trinidad and Tobago has been heavily shaped by ethnicity, with the PNM drawing much of its support from Afro-Trinidadians and other ethnic groups, and the UNC primarily from Hindu Indo-Trinidadians. The UNC actually has a long history of racial agitation, and the racist undertones of their messaging have only gotten louder over the course of their current administration. Coming into power, Kamala barely addressed the country on anything. While the previous government and Prime Minister, for all their failures, communicated regularly through press briefings, Kamala could barely be seen, even during crises. Her government cancelled the Independence Day parade due to concerns of an assassination plot, yet hosted the Prime Minister of India on a diplomatic visit, no problem. They even gave him a national honor. Crime continues to be a political football, but for all their talk and all their years of opposition, the UNC's only solution has been to fire a bunch of people in government programs and to institute a perpetual state of emergency. Surely a recipe for long-term social stability. We've been under a state of emergency for almost the entirety of their term in office. Our rights have been suspended and people have been detained without charge for all that time. As a replacement for the state of emergency, the government proposed a Zones of Special Operations, or ZOSO bill, which would basically apply mini states of emergency to crime hotspots, aka poor communities, meaning your rights would be suspended on a geographic basis. Also, the Prime Minister would have the power to decide which areas receive that designation, granting unprecedented power to the head of the executive branch of government. Anyone who opposed the bill was considered in the government's eyes to be pro-crime. And despite both the opposition party and independent senators proposing amendments to the bill, the government wouldn't budge. Thankfully, the bill failed, but the government went on to accuse the independent senators of corruption, even though they have not provided any evidence of that accusation. They've been making a lot of allegations and accusations without evidence or charge, by the way. This government also accused the opposition of being tied to drug lords and criminals, in a time when the US was literally bombing fishermen out of the water, including 2 Trinidadian citizens, on similar grounds. Part of the reason the ZOSO bill failed was no doubt due to the police violence issue that has plagued this country since before independence, as the police took the life of a surrendering young father and paralyzed his partner in broad daylight, sparking the outrage of the entire country. The Prime Minister and the government have treated the victims of this incident and the protesters of this incident with nothing but contempt, going as far as to legislate no protest zones around the typical areas where people would be gathering to protest the police killing. There also appears to be a coordinated network of social media bots pushing pro-government messaging. You can make of that what you will. Since I recorded this, some more news came through and our Prime Minister has literally defended the government phone tapping the private conversations of citizens. That is the degree to which they are brazen with their invasive authoritarian policies. And the chaos goes on and on. To me, all these incidents have revealed a domestic government that is intolerant of criticism, eager to centralize power, and willing to frame every opponent as an enemy of the nation. That same government has, through memoranda, diplomatic and military partnerships, and investment, chosen to align this country with the US, the not-so-hidden empire of our times. Without need for military conquest, the Republic of Trinidad Tobago has bent the knee. As it stands, with thus far ineffective local efforts at resistance, we're cooked.